Hello Tyrians, my name is Mel, and this is my review of the Guild Wars 2 beta for Heart of Thorns. I will start off by saying that I don't exactly understand ArenaNet's thinking in having to do these sorts of events and updates every single Tuesday. It makes sense if they want to do like an update to the game, do like a regular holiday event, but with the beta testing, it doesn't exactly make sense because that limits how many people will actually be able to participate in it. But moving on to the beta itself. For my first session out of the two I was partaking in, I chose the Revenant class to get a feel for it. I started off using the hammer, which I felt was personally a little clunky, but it could be because it was the first time I was playing the class. It'd be like playing a Mesmer with a greatsword, and it takes a while to get used to the fact that it's ranged. My only real problem with the hammer was that the 3 skill, which was Phase Smash, moved you. It changed the camera by itself. It was an AoE attack where you would select it, aim it for a spot, and it would send you flying over to that direction, and the camera would change by itself over to there, and then it would teleport you back to where you started. Because it changed the camera by itself and you couldn't do anything about it, it was extremely unappealing to the eyes and was hard to look at. Got to the point where I stopped using the hammer and just went with the mace and axe. The mace and axe combo themselves was very fun to play with. I enjoyed how easy it was to understand and play around with. It also made for great combo fields like might stacking and getting swiftness. I didn't use the skills themselves for the demon and dwarven stances, so I don't have a particular opinion on those. For the second session, I played a necromancer, hoping that there would be the specializations that they showed, but they sadly were not in the beta. Moving on to the story now. You're kind of tossed into the story section of the beta. You start off in an instance which shows you the ending of Season 2, and then you're thrown right in. But I'm hoping that's only because it's beta. Where the new map takes place and where the Silver Wastes are, they are directly connected, at least during the beta, and that doesn't exactly feel like the Pact went out very far before they got wiped out, which doesn't seem very appealing story-wise. They're also trying to do choices for story events, like kind of how they did it for the personal story. And I don't know exactly how I feel about it yet because they only allowed you to pick one of the 2 options during the beta. The other one was closed out of the beta option, so it's not like you could play for the first session, do this one path, and then do the second one afterwards. So I don't have an opinion on that yet. There were characters involved with the story instance as well. Kanak was there following you around, but he didn't say anything at all. And near the end, the instance Ritlock just explodes out of nowhere. And while I found it extremely cool about the way he came in and how nice that cutscene was that showed his entrance, it lacked explanation as to why he was there. Moving on to the events portion, which would probably be one of the bigger sections. It's basically a big King of the Hill game. It kind of lacked variety. There was a lot of pushing and pulling for events. So during the daytime, you're assaulting the Mordor, trying to capture as many points as you possibly can. But then when it turns to nighttime, it sort of goes the other way around. So it's just a matter of who can take what, who can hold it the longest, and that's that. And it was like that almost throughout the entire half of the map that was allowed to us. And while there were other events that did different things, that was the majority of it. Also, they sort of functioned into event chains where you would do one event, and once you passed it, you would immediately move on to another event associated with it, which the pacing seemed too quick. There were so many events going on at the same time, and with how fast these events moved forward immediately after the other one, they don't even give you a chance to pause. It's, you finish this event, and then seconds later, the next part of that event chain continues forward. And because there were so many events just happening, even in just this half of the map that was allowed to us, there was like 10 events going on in the same general area, so you couldn't even tell exactly what was happening because there was too much going on. And some of these event chains were too long as well. There was one for the highlight where you're doing several different events, and at the end of it, from what I know, I didn't actually do this myself, was there's supposed to be a large wyvern fight at the end of it. But it never got that far, at least in the 2 sessions that I played, because the event chain lasted so long and there were so many things that if you messed up at one point, it'd basically have to start over. I'd say a good thing that added at least a little bit of flavor to these was each event had a slightly different mechanic to it. There's one area where you're trying to work your way towards these ruins, but it's blocked off, so you have to wait for it to open up. And during this point, you can get sniper rifles to shoot down these large Mordrum husks coming towards you from below, and you want to take them out before they can get up there, but you can't do normal damage to them. You have to use the sniper rifles. So that was a nice taste. There was also another one where you could place bombs out and toss them around, but like I said before, with so many events going on, it's hard to tell what was going on specifically. On to the masteries system. It was a little confusing at first because at no point does it tell you you have to select a mastery track to follow in order to level it. They just give you skill points to earn. Well, basically they're skill points, they're mastery points. It's just a rebranding of the skill point system. But at no point does it tell you you have to level up a track before you can put points into it, which was a little irritating because I spent over 1.5 sessions not doing anything, not going into those tracks and trying to figure out how to do it because it never said. The masteries themselves, though, the glider, I was sort of confused with it. I'm guessing because it's new, but the main thing I have to say about it was while it was somewhat enjoyable to play around with, the fact that you had to be in free fall before it could be activated did not help it whatsoever. I would be thinking if they could replace it with like you press spacebar twice and then it activates it. I feel like that would work out much better than if one were to be falling down already 10 or so feet. I don't know exactly what the fall distance is before you can activate it, but you have to fall 10 or so feet before you can activate it, and by that point it sort of makes it harder to get where you were originally wanting to go. There were lore masteries as well, one for the Itzel, one for the New Hawk, and the other for Exalted. By putting points in these mastery tracks and leveling them up, they give you access to being able to fight enemies better. You get access to that specific group's services, and you can also like fight their champions or do trials and things like that for prizes. There's also a mushroom mastery, where you'd be able to use the various mushrooms spread throughout the Maguma. So like there are jumping mushrooms, which you can't use unless you build into it. Same thing with mushrooms that give you speed, and so on. There's also a track for being able to craft precursors for legendaries. There are 4 tiers to it. The first 3 was tier 1 through 3 to craft the regular precursors that we currently have in game, and then the final tier was to be able to craft the precursors for the Maguma. Then lastly there was a fractals mastery, but there was no descriptions to them at all. And now we move on to the map. The map itself was fairly beautiful to a point. It sort of reminded me of how Keswick's Hills looked before and after the Crate Tower. Because before, it was beautiful and gorgeous and I enjoyed it. But then after the Crate Tower collapsed, and now there's just this big old mess there. And that's sort of what it's like on Verdant Brink. And still, though, even with all the destruction everywhere, there are still areas where it is fairly beautiful, like the Mushroom Caves, there are ancient ruins that had an arena pit, and Amayali's sort of temple area, the Itzel and New Hawk's goddess of the forest. And it was visually stunning and gorgeous. I don't know exactly how much I can say about that itself. The Itzel home area was also interesting. It had many branches to it that led down different paths. There was areas high above and below you. Some areas were also blocked off to a point where you'd have to have masteries like the mushroom mastery, so you could be able to jump on a mushroom to get you high enough to land on one of the upper paths. So it's nice that they did that as well. The last section I will be covering is the races and creatures. I said this before in an article I had made, but I feel like the Itzel and the Nuhawk are way too big. Their sizes don't exactly fit in with how I feel that they should be, because the Hylic are sort of like regular frogs. So if you compare like a regular frog to a tree frog, which is what the Itzel are based on, the Itzel should be much smaller, maybe the size of an Asurus, maybe a little bigger, but it doesn't fit. I mean, the Itzel are the size of a Norn, basically, and the Nuhawk are twice the size of a Norn. If you were to look at them in the game, they're too big. And I remember ArenaNet saying that they wanted to do that so you can actually visually see them, but what about the Asura? The Asura are small, and we can go into first-person mode, and it's really short. At the very least, Asura would still be able to look at and appreciate the Itzel, but I don't know. It's hard to tell if ArenaNet will be able to change their sizes at all, for future updates, but I'm not going to exactly question their choices, just offering my personal opinion there. The Zintel were also there. They are basically highly religious Hylic. They will forcefully convert those to their sun god beliefs, but they didn't seem like enemies, at least not while I was doing the beta, like none of the areas I was at. For the most point, they were helping the Itzel get food and things like that, and they also had a camp up on one of the cliffs where they had Itzel working with them. And like I said earlier, there were also Exalted were mentioned, but they aren't seen anywhere in the beta. Moving on to more hostile enemies. The Mordrim were basically the same as before, and basically they're just big corrupted plant people. So the Mordrim guards at least look to me as if they are corrupted Silvari. There's sort of two forms of them. There's like a male version, which is big and brutish, and a female version, which is smaller and much more slender. They tend to be the assassins from what I noticed. So obviously there's going to be corrupted Silvari involved, but will other races end up being corrupted like the Risen were? Obviously Silvari were unable to be corrupted by Zaitan because they are already minions of Mordremoth, but because these other races are not minions of any dragon, will they be able to be converted just like the Branded or Risen were? The Breachers, kind of like big worms that spit out acid. It's hard to tell. It would have seemed nicer to me if they worked more like mortars, like they fired like poison from a distance, but it seemed like it was much more they did things up close than anything else. There's also a Mordrim mount, which didn't have a name specifically to it, but it seemed like one of the dinosaurs, but it was corrupted by Mordremoth and became a mount for a guard, which they were fairly interesting to fight. They were enjoyable to look at as well, and I'm sure we will come across non-corrupted forms of them once the expansion comes out itself. Also, adorable little raptors, which by themselves don't do a lot, but when there are about 10 of them, and each time they nip at your feet at a stack of bleeding, it eventually adds up and definitely does a lot more damage than you'd expect. And while I didn't see any wyverns, I know that there was an event chain that led to it. I said this earlier. It's a shame that I didn't get to see them at all. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the mushroom people. They were probably the most interesting thing I've seen so far in Guild Wars. It's just a mushroom head with like the waist of a person below. So it was kind of like a Goomba, except they were hilarious, and they had, I don't know, I feel like ArenaNet probably put too much time into making their mushroom butts extremely distinct. I don't know. But there also seemed to be a hierarchy involved, like there were soldiers and guys that shot spikes out, and it got to the point where there were king mushrooms as well, and they were like I said, interesting and enjoyable to fight. Okay, well that's it for my beta review. This is sort of the first one I've ever done, so it's a matter of hitting things out and working my way to making better videos past this. I thank you all for watching this video, and I hope you will join me again.